On This Week in Enterprise Tech, a secure Internet of Things, robots and AI aren't trying to take our jobs yet, and securing our energy infrastructure. Twice on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Twiet. This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 196, recorded July 1st, 2016. Practicing Safe Energy with Belden. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. Are you hiring? With ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to more than 100 job sites, including social networks, all with a single click. Screen, rate, and hire the right candidates fast. Try ZipRecruiter with a free 4-day trial now at ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. And by Atlassian. Unleash your team's potential with collaborative software tools like HipChat and Jira, which will enable you to work and communicate better together. Visit Atlassian.com to learn more. Welcome to Twiet. This Week in Enterprise Tech, it's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballasar, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. But of course, I don't guide you by myself. I've got my friends, I've got my colleagues, I've got my fellow geeks at heart, starting with Mr. Brian Chi, the director of the Advanced Network Computing Laboratory in Honolulu, Hawaii. Brian, you have been jumping around the islands like a madman. What's been going on with you?
I am just desperately trying to get things rolling for the new embedded systems class in the fall and Maker Faire and so forth. And a big thank you to JJ to the 264 for the suggestions for a couple episodes. You will get your wish very soon.
See, we love to give people what they want. Speaking of giving people what they want, Chibert, I don't mean to embarrass you. Actually, no, I do mean to embarrass you. But I understand you're turning like 140 tomorrow, right?
Maybe in dog years.
Dog years, okay. No, but it is your birthday. This July 4th weekend is not just the weekend that we Americans celebrate our independence, but also the weekend that we celebrate the Chibert. How old will you be, Chibert?
I'll be 55. And the funny part is I'm July 2, my brother is July 4, and my mom is July 6. So my mom spent 2 years in the hospital having babies.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna move on from that one. Let's get away from the hospital and the birth ward and go over to the East Coast with Curtis Franklin from Information Week Radio. Curtis, how is your weekend?
My weekend is looking great because I'm going to be running a race on July 4th down in the Orlando area. My brother's birthday is July 5th, and in the meantime, we're going to try our best to keep from bursting into flames from the typical July heat in Florida. But it's a great weekend, and we're looking forward to it. But first, we're going to lead into it with a great episode of Twiet.
I think so. I think we owe it to our Twiet Riot to give them all the enterprise goodness that they can handle. Speaking of that, let's jump into it with the blips. Now, mixing the ultra-sensitive user information of a healthcare provider with the embarrassingly insecure hardware of an Internet of Things network seems to be a bad idea. A really bad idea. But enterprise networking vendor Avaya claims that they've got just the IoT for you with their newly released open networking adapter, a mouse-sized box that enables any Ethernet-equipped device to securely become part of the Internet of Things. But aside the chuckles and the eye rolls for a moment, because Avaya has done a few good things with the ONA. On the hardware side, it's a dual Ethernet proxy device with a dual-core CPU powering Open vSwitch. On the software side, it features two-factor authentication with a shared key between the device and the software-defined networking controller that runs the GUI. Now, the ONA itself doesn't store any data, nor does it transmit anything in clear text. All the heavy lifting is done by the SDN, which means that stealing or breaching the device essentially gives you a brick. Furthermore, since it is an SDN device, IT administrators can configure specific routing policies for data that are enforced simultaneously on the ONA, the switch, the router, the SAN, and the firewall. It is a version 1 device, so there will be a few glitches to sort, but early testing seems to show that this could be an Internet of Things device that we might actually feel comfortable putting on the internet.
Box Shuttle offers a migration path to the cloud. Box plans to help enterprise customers migrate content to its cloud data centers with a service called Box Shuttle. Box Shuttle, introduced as beta software on Wednesday with GA planned for the fall, aims to pave the path by which enterprises can move data to Box's cloud where, at least in theory, collaboration, sharing, and management of files becomes easier. Now, Box Shuttle is a hybrid offering of software and services, and according to Box CEO Aaron Levy, quote, "It's both a professional services offering where our people will come in and help manage the migration of data from legacy environments and software that does the underlying migration work."
Oops, a travel agency crashes due to an unwanted Windows 10 upgrade, and the agency wins the settlement. This particular upgrade caused the Seattle travel agency's computers to become unusable for doing, well, travel stuff. And the owner was awarded a $10K settlement for lost wages and the cost of new computers. While an appeal was filed, it was later dropped by Microsoft, but they're still denying any wrongdoing. What do you think about being forced to upgrade? Me, I'd rather have a carrot than a stick.
Well, when we're talking about faster internet, it's all carrot. Back in 2014, Twiat covered the announcement of the faster Trans-Pacific fiber link being built out by NEC through a funding of a consortium of 6 companies, including China Mobile, China Telecom, Global Transit, KDDI, Singtel, and Google. Yesterday, the 9,000-kilometer or 5,600-mile link between the U.S. and Japan lit up, with primary landing points in Oregon and the Japanese cities of Chiba and Mie, and links up and down the West Coast, Japan, and Asia. The faster system uses multiple spectrum ranges and phases to push 60 terabits per second through repeaters placed every 37 miles. The new run will allow Google to offer faster and more secure Google Cloud Platform services in Japan, faster and less expensive access to Google services across Asia, and perhaps most importantly, a super high-speed link that can offer extra resiliency to the Trans-Pacific network in the case of undersea earthquakes that might once again break the Transpac network.
Robots and AI aren't going to destroy jobs yet. According to Forrester Research, the future of human workers is not as bleak as many fear. Though cognitive technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and robotic automation will eliminate 16% of U.S. jobs by 2025, according to Forrester, they'll also create new jobs amounting to a 9% increase over the same period. Now, Forrester sees growth in person service jobs like funeral directors, self-driving hearse startups, take note, robot service technicians, and other highly skilled workers can also look forward to ongoing employment. In many cases, automated systems will not replace workers, but will work alongside them. Because of this, businesses will need to ensure that humans and machines get along. For companies implementing changes along these lines, Forrester advises allocating resources to cultural and change management issues, and even providing financial incentives in relation to the rollout of cognitive systems. The firm also recommends that companies rethink their talent acquisition strategies to ensure they have personnel with the skills needed to complement those cognitive systems.
You know, come on, people. Your drones are a safety hazard when water bombers are at fires. It's an all too familiar story. Firefighters again had to suspend water tanker drops due to folks getting their drones in the way. Your selfish and irresponsible drone operations are costing the firefighters time, their safety, and potentially homes in the area. The Monrovia Fire Department states it is vitally important to note fire officials cannot deploy firefighting aircraft when private individuals are flying drones in the fire response locations, unquote. So stop it already. It's irresponsible drone owners and operators that are driving tighter and tighter rules, and pretty soon you're going to be driving jail terms. So stop it already.
It's time for liberty and bandwidth for all. A 14-page memo detailing the technology and innovation agenda of presumptive Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton was leaked this week. and it covers everything from surveillance to bringing broadband cable internet access to every American household by 2020. In the agenda, Clinton supports net neutrality and treating broadband like a public utility with a promise to break broadband monopolies, allowing competitors like Google Fiber and municipal networks an equal shot at the market. She addressed the issues of encryption, saying that a discussion of encryption must include technical experts and industry insiders rather than just lawmakers and law enforcement reps, as well as the issue of the new sharing economy and the rights of those involved in crowdsourcing. Though it is a set of campaign year promises and therefore subject to a higher level of cynicism, it is important to note that the leaked memo does seem to mesh with her legislative record while serving in the U.S. Senate, where she fought against SOPA and pushed to reform to stop patent trolls. The leak may spur Silicon Valley tech companies, which donated more than $13 million to Obama's campaign, but only $2.7 to Hillary's current run and Donald Trump's $22,000, to open their wallets and their support. So don't be surprised if the Clinton campaign pushes her as the tech choice for president. Just not, the tech choice for best email best practices. Well, that does it for the blips. Let's go ahead and jump into the bites. But first, let's thank the first sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, let me ask you, do you want the perfect hire? Well, of course you do. Who doesn't? Because it's the people that you hire. It's the people that you bring into your company, into your organization, that are going to determine the success or the failure of your next project. They bring in the inspiration. They bring in the skills. They bring in the value. So why are you still posting for jobs like it was 1990? Posting in one place isn't enough to find the quality candidates that you need to supply your company with that vital skill, that vital talent. And that's why we're so happy to have ZipRecruiter as a sponsor of the Twilight Riot. Now, ZipRecruiter understands that you can't just post in one place. And thanks to ZipRecruiter.com, you can post to 100-plus job sites with that single click, reaching job sites, popular social media destinations like Facebook, Twitter, Google+, pretty much all the places frequented by the talent that your business needs. You just post once, and within 24 hours, you can watch your candidates from any city or any industry nationwide roll into ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use interface. You can also search by skills, location, experts, experience, and more. ZipRecruiter will automatically match potential hires with your precise needs, and they've even created a responsive design that works on desktops, laptops, and mobile devices, complete with a mobile application process, so you won't ever have to miss any potential great hires just because you weren't on the device that they wanted to be on. No more juggling emails or calls back to your office. No more prolonged back and forth. You just screen, rate, and hire the right person fast. ZipRecruiter has been used by over 800,000 businesses, and you can try it now for free. Getting the right people for your company is so important to your future. Do you really want to leave it up to chance? Right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free by going to ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Twiet. Access millions of resumes on ZipRecruiter with thousands of new ones added daily. ZipRecruiter is the fastest way to hire great people. And we thank ZipRecruiter for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Coming up next, we have a special treat for you. If you've ever wondered what you need to defend the energy infrastructure of a nation, well, we've got a guest from Belden who's going to explain exactly how they do that. But first, we got to jump into the bites. Now, this first one strikes near and dear to the Twilight Riot hearts because we love things that deliver bandwidth. We love things that deliver network connectivity, even those things that are slightly off. Now, Boeing has jumped into that game again, trying to design a solar plane that could stay up for years at a time, which could be used as a substitute for a low Earth orbiting satellite. Now, this story has been reappearing over and over again with balloons, solar airplanes, manned dirigibles, you name it. It's a hot tech right now. But Boeing's new design seems to have a chance at being a really low Earth orbit replacement for satellites. Now, this type of system gets past those huge costs of backhauls for terrestrial-based towers that we see with things like Project Loon and the like, and instead it uses a very relatively inexpensive aircraft that can stay up for months at a time to deliver the same kind of service with a higher reliability than satellites. Now, could this beat Facebook and Google Loon to the market with a UAV that actually brings high-speed wireless to a world regardless of where our backhauls may be? Chibert, let me throw this open to you first. This again, is one of these stories that we hear from time to time. Facebook is doing it. Google is doing it. Microsoft is experimenting with it. We've even got startups that are trying to deliver this sort of terrestrial, upper terrestrial, low orbit internet to city blocks. Is this just another entry, or is this something slightly different?
Keep in mind, Boeing has one of the longest track records of high-flying aircraft. They actually, when Lockheed kind of went away, it went into Boeing. A bunch of their engineers went to Boeing. And I should point out that one of the key people actually worked on the U-2. Now, keep in mind, the U-2 is very much a glider. It just happens to have a jet engine on it. So having this kind of pedigree, I personally think that Boeing's got a good chance at making this work. And I should point out, while everybody wants to compare this to low Earth orbit satellites, the real comparison is actually geosynchronous, because you only need one circling over a large metropolitan area to cover the entire metropolitan area. So it's dramatically cheaper than having low Earth orbit satellites, because those have to be a constellation like the Iridium satellite, because they're moving so fast, they circle in and out of the area. So you have to have this crisscross pattern going all the time. So having something that can stay up for months at a time, they've actually tried it with Zeppelins, the military has, and it just didn't quite work as well. But having an autonomous system that can stay up there without having to change out pilots, now that's something that might actually work, and we'll see if Boeing actually can make use of the talent that they've stolen from the Lockheed Skunk Works.
I want to throw some of the financial issues over to Curtis in just a bit, but Chibert, I want to stay with you to talk a bit more about tech, because one of the questions I hear every time one of these systems is announced, and I'm thinking of, Google did their super high frequency test out in the Nevada desert. They've got Project Loon, which is running. In fact, we saw that at Google I/O. Very cool piece of technology, by the way. And then you've got Facebook's little circling whatever those might be over in Africa. Why is it so difficult to have something stay in one place? It seems as if this should be something that we've licked by now. But as you mentioned, even when we have low Earth orbiting satellites, we have to use a constellation, because you have to hand off signal from satellite to satellite to satellite. What is the major technical challenge of making something like this work?
It's, moving parts. Just look at the solar plane that stopped in Hawaii and then started flying around the world. It had some problems. In fact, on the leg coming over from Asia to Hawaii, the battery is overheated. Because remember, this guy's not going to have power, sunlight all the time, even if you get high enough. So the problem is going to be you got to have batteries. So we're still working out some of the bugs, and that's why I'm not willing to say, yes, this is absolutely going to work. But if you can see in the diagram on the screen, it gives us something very low to the earth comparatively. And because it's lower, we use less energy. We don't have to store as much energy. It's gotten better on the type of technology, used for the structural and for the electrical and hopefully storage. And who knows? That's why I'm not willing to say this is definitely going to happen, but this is something that's got real possibility. And if it's up high enough, we start getting away from a lot of the weather that has been the problem with traditional solar-powered airplanes. And because it's can go so high and no pilots, we don't have to worry about oxygen. Well, it could get really, really interesting. And I, for one, am going to watch this very closely.
And I as well. Now, Curtis, I love this kind of technology. This is always sort of the pie-in-the-sky moonshot tech that leads to practical uses of pieces of the technology. But there's a part of me that says, okay, I understand you want to build these devices because it's cheaper than launching a satellite. But if the price of launching payloads into orbit goes down, say, I don't know, with some sort of space race between private corporations that have developed feasible space vehicles, does this still make sense? I mean, if I can put a satellite into geostationary orbit for twice, 3 times, 4 times as much as it might cost for me to build a small constellation of high-flying planes, don't I choose the orbital platform instead?
Well, I tell you, Padre, the place that I see some real value in a project like this is in the sort of applications where the companies are paying a premium for performance. We're already seeing cases where you have companies that are doing things like restringing microwave cable, not microwave cables, but setting up microwave towers around lakes so that they can get straight lines rather than having the latency involved in running cables around lakes and structures. Those same sorts of companies are doing things like paying to have their own undersea cables run with fewer dips into the ravines and valleys undersea so that they can, again, wring a few more milliseconds out of the connection. For those companies, and these are largely financial companies, having the reduced distance that's involved in even a string of these planes that are autonomous and circling cities, rather than the time required to shoot signals to a satellite and back, could make a lot of sense. These can be line of sight, straight lines. These can be more secure than anything you're going to find in any terrestrial system. And like I said, I think that you can wring a few more milliseconds out of it. So I see these being used as high-speed, secure network segments for high-demand, critical performance networks, rather than being used as just general broadcast broadband, at least where the big money is concerned.
Cheever, let's talk about some of that big money, because one of the features that was touted by Google when they first started developing a technology like this was the ability to fast deploy. They were saying, look, even if you had an inexpensive orbital platform launching device, there's still something to be said about being able to put a communications point in the air over position within hours rather than days. Is that actually something that people worry about? You know, being able to get something up immediately rather than waiting the time it would take to prep a launch?
The people that really want to have this type of capability are the military and emergency responders. Simply put, a launch takes years to plan, and the waiting list is years long. Not the least of which is if you're going to put up a geosynchronous satellite, you got to have a slot because they're only a few degrees of arc difference. And so some of the smaller nations in the world, in order to raise a lot of cash, they've been selling off or leasing off their geosynchronous satellite slots. Anyway, so for the military, being able to not have to depend upon terrestrial communications and have theater-wide communications instantly, say, for instance, something really nasty happened in the Middle East, and being able to launch something like this over the battlefield up out of the reach of a lot of the missiles and so forth, means we can have the safety and ease and so forth of a satellite, but with the lower latency of almost a terrestrial system. So it's got a lot of advantages, and the amount of money involved is staggering. And you also got to keep in mind, Jabba, this isn't being funded by a nation or something. Boeing has a slush fund that they use out of their profits in order to fund research projects, which then they go and try and sell to people. If they can get a proof of concept up and flying and prove that it actually works, I will lay even money that there's going to be a lot of people lining up at their doorstep, willing to throw money at them and say, I want one. I want my slot. I want to get one as soon as I can, because it is a holy grail type of thing for communications.
Actually, let's talk about this a little bit, because that is an interesting point when you talk about funding. In the past, if you had a project like this, there was almost always inevitably some source of government funding, military funding. DARPA would get into a lot of these projects because they want to push the technology forward. That's become less and less necessary over the last couple of years. You've got Facebook, Microsoft, Google, and a handful of other companies who are essentially doing spec investment. They're saying yes, this is going to cost us tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, but the potential payout if we perfect the solution is in the billions, the tens, and hundreds of billions of dollars. Is this the new DARPA, the private sector saying, I bet we could do this, and we're going to invest our money into it?
This is something that we've seen before. Cessna actually did that in the past. Boeing has done it many times in the past, going back to the very beginnings of, biplanes and so forth. A lot of aircraft companies have done this. Now, when we have this amount of cash, liquid cash available in a corporation, suddenly you can do things on scales unimaginable in a few years ago without the inefficiencies that comes with typically with government. And the other thing too is the speculation comes in because if the government funds it, that means the government owns it. So corporations like Boeing, where they are an aircraft manufacturer and they do have some liquid money because of the wildly successful 777, 737, and so forth. Now all of a sudden they can get back into the old speculation where they can go and build something before someone demands it, and they get to keep all the profit instead of having to share it with the federal government.
Indeed, this is one of those stories that we will be tracking, again, because it's not just Boeing, it's not just the big tech companies. There's a couple of old traditional satellite, non-terrestrial communications vendors that are getting into this business. I think it's going to heat up over the next year or so. But let's go ahead and move on, because there is something that we want to strike here for our enterprise folk, and that is to talk about the balance between Microsoft and Linux in the data center. Now, any of us who are administrators knows that we've gone from data centers that have been typically massively Microsoft to those that are equal or even have Linux in the lead. Microsoft itself has said that at least a third of all of the VMs and containers that are running in the Azure infrastructure are running Linux and Linux products. So it comes as no surprise that Microsoft is trying to play nice with its former competitor of Linux. Now, we know that .NET Core 1.0 was released at the Red Hat Summit of all places. A version 1.0 of the .NET Core was announced in 2014 and has officially been released with pomp and circumstance at the Red Hat Summit alongside ASP.NET Core 1.0, the open source version. It's all cross-platform, and it's all part of the Microsoft Web Development Stack. Chibert, remind our audience, why is Microsoft doing this? Because there's going to be people who are looking at this from a distance saying, wait a minute, why would Microsoft want to give people another reason to use a Linux product since they no longer need a Microsoft server to run this .NET framework?
I don't think they see it quite that way. I think they see it more along the lines of portability. Remember how the promise of Java? They said, Java on the server, Java on the client is truly portable, and how badly that turned out to be a lie. I don't know. I've actually got like 4 or 5 versions of Java on my MacBook just to run certain pieces, and Java has turned out to be a horrible language on portability. But the .NET Core is wildly successful for the Windows world. And what they're looking at is, gee, if we could make it portable into the Linux world, now all of a sudden it's kind of like inventing Windows again. Now that we have Windows, now we have a common platform, now we can have something that we can develop upon, we can do all kinds of really cool things. And writers like myself and Kurt, we actually put a big giant prediction in one of the chapters on our cloud computing book that it will be the portability of code between platforms that's really and truly going to make applications portable. And Java, again, hits the nail on the head. It also means security because the Linux Apache MySQL PHP LAMP environment is great. It can be secure, but it's not always done well. Whereas the .NET world has some really, really great audit tools that allow you to go and do things. It's, in fact, getting a Windows server, a .NET environment, certified for use in classified environments is dramatically easier than doing it for the Linux world. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying, you know, it's something, you got to play this balancing act. And I think Microsoft is really and truly betting on the portability bandwagon in order to help them sell additional platforms.
Yeah, I'm absolutely with you. I got my natural preferences, but the management tools that I can get from Microsoft always seem to work better across platforms and across multiple branches, multiple offices than I get with Linux. But Curtis, I want to go over to you because something that Chibert mentioned was, of course, this portability. The portability is incredibly important. I did have a chance to speak with a Microsoft representative who was not Lou Maresca. I don't want to get Lou in trouble here. But in talking about this, he essentially said, look, we understand that Linux is not going away. So what we want to do is we want to push to our strength. And the strength of Microsoft right now is the fact that they have an infrastructure that is practically second to none. Maybe Amazon and Google are battling it out with them. But their Azure cloud platform has turned out to be the cash cow, and a cash cow that can continue to give into the near future. So do you see this as Microsoft essentially saying, we want you to be on our infrastructure no matter what your OS choice might be, but we're also going to make it much easier for you to move between Windows and Linux, between cloud and hybrid and private infrastructure. And we guess that once you see how nice it is to be able to jump around, you're going to stay inside the Microsoft wall, even if that stay is in a Linux container.
I think you're onto something, and in several dimensions, because I think that Microsoft wants more developers who become expert in .NET and ASP.NET, and there were a couple of other things that they've open sourced that they announced at the same time. Having that skill basis makes it more likely that companies will build their applications on top of the Microsoft infrastructure. I think you're absolutely right regarding Azure, that this is the cash cow, and they want to make it easy for companies that are running backends on Linux, clients on OS X, and everything in between to build systems that include Microsoft Azure on the back end. And there's one thing that's worth pointing out here too. Both the .NET Core 1.0 and ASP.NET Core 1.0 are subsets of the full Microsoft .NET framework and Microsoft ASP.NET framework. That means that if someone really wants to go all out and have an incredibly function-rich environment that is based on a single framework, right now they're going to need to go purely into the Microsoft fold. Now, this could change in the future as more people commit changes to the open source version. But for now, Microsoft is walking a wonderful line where they have made these genuinely open source. I don't want to imply that they haven't. They're genuinely open source, but there's still a better version that is Microsoft priority. So it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out. I have a feeling, though, that in the same way that Apple's Swift is rapidly becoming a full-fledged open source programming language, we're going to see .NET Core and ASP.NET Core become full-fledged open source frameworks that are used by lots and lots of companies.
Well, gentlemen, I appreciate the insight. Let's go ahead and move away from the bytes because I'd love to stay and discuss, but we've got some excitement coming up for the Twilight Riot. We've got Rekha SHENOY of Belden. She is the GM of Industrial Cybersecurity at Belden. She's going to be talking to us about what it means to secure our energy infrastructure. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take a moment to thank another sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now, behind every great human achievement is an idea. And next to that idea is a team that takes that idea and turns it into something truly spectacular. Mapping the human genome, the mastery of 3D printing, the next tool for space exploration. All these things happen because someone had an idea, brought together a team, and then got out of the way after giving that team everything they needed to succeed. And that's exactly what you can do with Atlassian. We've been using Atlassian at TWIT here as a vital piece of our creative process. Our engineering team uses Confluence, which allows them to document equipment and work processes. They can share results and keep the team on the same page of every project. Everyone can see the ideas that have come up into the group, and they can comment on a timeline. So not only do we know where the project is headed, we know where it's been. With Jira, we get clear and concise task management that lets us see who is assigned what and when. It lets us manage vendors and organize our constantly growing pile of tasks, which would otherwise be overwhelming. HipChat ties everything together from event planning to DevOps to interdepartmental communication with real-time IM and video on any of our devices. And finally, Bitbucket lets us share, review, and improve our code in real time. Together, this ecosystem of Atlassian products lets us truly take our team to their ultimate potential. Bottom line, Atlassian can turn your good team into a great team, and if you're not trying them, well, you're not trying hard enough. From startups to 10,000-seat enterprises, Atlassian makes great ideas real. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to visit Atlassian.com to see how Jira, Confluence, HipChat, and Bitbucket give your team everything you need to organize, discuss, and complete your shared work. Atlassian, helping teams everywhere team up to create what's next. That's Atlassian.com, Atlassian.com. And we thank Atlassian for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's time for my favorite part of every episode, where we get to introduce our guest expert and they get to shine their knowledge down upon the Twilight Riot. We welcome to the show Rekha SHENOY of Belden. She is the GM of Industrial Cybersecurity, and she's here to talk to the Twilight Riot. Rekha, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, before we start, as we always do, could you please tell us a little bit about Belden? What is Belden? What do you do?
Sure. So Belden is actually a 100-year-old company, so you can imagine it was pre-tech days. But over the last 15 years, they've really evolved into a company that started out in the industrial world and has delivered products to the industrial space, starting with industrial cabling and connectors, and has gone up the value chain. So today, they actually are the largest industrial networking provider, having brands like Hirschmann and Garrettcom as part of their portfolio. And over 18 months ago, they acquired Tripwire, which is a cybersecurity company. And as part of that, they've really driven a strategy to develop industrial-focused cybersecurity solutions for their customers. So given the long relationships they've had with companies that are truly industrial, and watching as they've evolved into the industrial Internet of Things, the request or the demands they've had from customers over the years has been, you've been helping us deliver the signal, now help us secure it. And that is my role at Belden, to really develop all of the industrial-focused, industrial-developed cybersecurity solutions for the market as they evolve into the industrial Internet of Things.
Oh, Rekha, there is an important word there, industrial. We heard it several times, but it's important to note that industrial fits in the enterprise, but it's a separate subset. And some people don't realize that the security precautions and the connectivity requirements for an industrial application do vary pretty significantly from what you would expect out of an enterprise office/branch network. What are the specific features of an industrial network that you think make it an industrial network?
I think at the core of it, I think there's some key tenets that I think people miss when you're coming in from an enterprise perspective. At the top of it is the word resilience. So we tend to use resilience on the enterprise side when we think about, data centers and things like that. But that's not the point. When we use security in our most critical enterprise environments, the reason we're putting cybersecurity in place is probably data protection. It's about confidentiality and integrity. In the industrial space, it's availability first and uptime beyond everything else. And the reason we need to have a cybersecurity strategy there isn't about preventing data from being lost. It really is about safety, about uptime and availability. So when we think about protecting our nation's grid, when you think about the risk factor, it's not a hacker who's about to steal some data from a grid or from a substation. It's about the idea of bringing it down for malicious intent, maybe not even, just inaccuracies and human error. But the point is, these are critical infrastructures that can't afford to go down. And the appreciation that cyber is a way to do that. A lot of industrial companies will think, if I want to bring a machine down, a robot that's doing something, I throw a wrench in something. That's a physical act. Whereas today, you can go ahead and create the same kind of harm on the cyber, not even having to be there, not even have to physically be there in front of a substation instead of in front of a generation plant, in front of the conveyor belt that's, driving these cars to be built, running these factories. All of those can be affected via cyber. And the appreciation that our cybersecurity solutions have to protect them from that kind of downtime, from that kind of malicious intent, requires, I think, the same security practices, but different security tools.
Absolutely. I like that. Thank you very much. That's a good distinction. Now, there's something there I kind of want to tease out a little bit because it's important when you think of industrial to think of connectivity first. That is the primary concern versus an enterprise network where connectivity is important, but you also need bandwidth. You're going to be transmitting quite a bit of data. You're going to be storing a lot of data that is incredibly sensitive, so you have to make sure that it ends up in the right zones and the right partitions. You don't really get that in industrial. It's not so much that there's going to be a lot of data being transferred. It's not so much that there's a lot of data that you have to save. It's that the communications that you do have to always be on, and they have to always be secure. And in order to get that, industrial companies like Belden have developed industrial communications protocols. How do those differ from the protocols that we might use inside, say, our studio here?
Good question, Robert. I think the key thing here is the word latency. So we don't think about it as uptime and efficiency. And I agree with you, they're not big bandwidths intensive. But think about it this way. When they develop industrial networks, what they're trying to do is make sure that there's a controller that's talking to a valve, a motor, a robot. And within that 10 millisecond time frame, that message is delivered to that device and it then does what it's supposed to do. Then there's safety systems that within 10 milliseconds or 2 milliseconds, whatever the requirement is, gets the response that it now needs to shut down something so someone's hand doesn't get cut off. So the word latency, as in how are your network systems designed so that the message that needs to be delivered to whatever the device is gets delivered within that time frame. So you can imagine that if we used enterprise products that had great bandwidth but didn't appreciate the latency, how conveyor belts can go haywire, cars can go flying off the shelf. Those kinds of things happen if there's not an appreciation for latency. So industrial protocols are designed with latency in mind, not necessarily high bandwidth. The second thing is, within industrial environments, a lot of different protocols exist, and they really are designed for a machine-to-machine communication. And a lot of them are different from automation vendors. So vendors like Rockwell, ABB, Siemens, all of them have developed their own versions of protocols to drive that communication between these machines. And within utilities in energy, the one that we see a lot of in North America is DNP3. So these protocols were originally designed, as standalone for that purpose, and most of them run over Ethernet IP today. So what that allows us to do from a cybersecurity perspective is understand that as much of these devices, these SCADA devices, these programmable logic controllers, things that people used to think of as electrical equipment in the past and are now generally computer equipment speaking DNP3 off of an Ethernet IP kind of a natural IP or TCP IP network. Now they're internet connected, but they weren't designed to be connected to an internet to do all kinds of things. They were designed to only speak DNP3 across this network and do only a handful of things. So what that allows a company like Belden to do is to develop a solution. We have a product called Tofino that sits very, very low in the Purdue model, sits in layer 2 and 3, layer 1 in a lot of cases. And what it does is it makes sure that only the expected protocol is passing through it. It's a device that sits closest to your programmable logic controllers or any communication coming into or out of it, and then manages it at that level. So we have customers that know that a certain programmable logic controller or a cell where, let's say, something is being manufactured or a substation should only have this protocol and down to only these commands go through. So, for example, a simple one would be you can only read but not write. But then you can even go down to individual commands that we know today are vulnerable to attack if inappropriately used. And we can lock it down so that as much as you have internet connectivity on those devices, you only have the special purpose network that it was originally intended for. And what this allows a lot of our customers to do is not just protect those networks and watch for malicious unintended activity, but it also allows you to say, listen, I know there's a Windows device on the other side, for example. I don't have the luxury as an industrial customer to patch it after every Patch Tuesday, but by controlling what goes through it, I have a effective control without having to update possibly not just Windows machines, but very, very old machines that really don't have the ability to handle maybe, modern day technology or updates and upgrades and things of that nature.
Okay, Rekha, this sounds great. I mean, this is what we've been expecting to hear from someone who represents the energy industry. However, some of the most terrifying stories that we've had here on Twiat have been SCADA devices or industrial energy devices that were not protected, that were horrifically connected to the internet. I can think of the example of certain gas stations in the United States that connected their gas meters to a serial to Ethernet device so that the energy companies could read the meters across the internet. Of course, none of that was protected, and people could actually shut off the pumps if they felt like it. We had another story about oil fields that were in remote locations that were connected via 30-year-old satellite terminals that I could intercept with a $20 software-defined radio connected to a laptop. We've got horror stories of tracking devices for, say, oil tankers moving across the country that not only could people intercept the signals, but they could pivot inside the devices to muck with the internal electronics. So there's naturally some cynicism inside of an enterprise person who looks at this and says, the energy industry does not have a good policy. They don't have a good history of taking security seriously. What has gone wrong with those types of connectivity options, and how would Belden fix it?
So I think it starts top down, So the question you have to start with is, are these companies, as they start moving in the industrial Internet of Things, let's start with that, right? It's a lot of hype and it's a lot of stories around what it is. But the reality is it's seeping in ways where connectivity sort of happens for, process improvements, for things like that. And the connectivity conversation doesn't get any kind of a security oversight. So today we see a lot of conversations where security is not present on that industrial side. There's not a cybersecurity conversation about protecting this new thing that we just added in. And a lot of this, what's scarier is that we're also doing all of this in moving things that were in the old days physical infrastructure into the cloud. So the problem's actually getting worse. Now, back to the examples you pointed out, a lot of times when I talk to industrial customers, they will say there's a reason we need to do it this way. And the reason they've got these incredibly, I agree with you, horrific networks that are extremely flat, no network segmentation, no firewalling for that matter, is because of their need for this latency. And sometimes you hear them talk about enterprise security products coming in. And what enterprise security products do, unfortunately, well-intentioned, is by scanning these very, very fragile devices, they bring them down. So in the security tool that was really supposed to protect this network was actually the risk factor. So it's a scary world in the sense that I think we need an industrial cybersecurity solution that understands the importance of uptime, and we need to be embedded in those environments. So if you think about something like a Tofino, in any of those scenarios, right, what we see a lot of is accidental hacks, if you may. So when you find out how the systems got hacked into, they were able to get to an IT-like system and then get onto that network. They discovered it, and then they decided to do something bad. That kind of stuff. When we see, wide open networks that are just waiting to be hacked, you wonder why there isn't more of this kind of stuff happening. And so that's why I think from a Belden perspective, we want to take a different approach. We strongly believe that it's resilience first in this market, and our products need to be more resilient than enterprise security products have been to this date. But then the other piece is these are special purpose networks. And there is a way to protect a special purpose network by segmenting it and making sure that only the special purpose communication is in action. That's the big value over here, is that you can't block a data center down to that level because there's all kinds of different activity going on, and it isn't a special purpose network. But within these industrial environments, you really have the ability to do that, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, actually, I think Specs in the chat room, he has it right on the head. He said, look, re-engineering networking is way past due. We've been building upon layers and layers of protocols and white papers and things that have worked in the past, trying to add on our own little layer of security. Like this, we're going to use all the existing infrastructure, but we're building this for us. And unfortunately, that hasn't worked really well. And like you said, maybe it's time to start recognizing that networking is not networking. There are different types of networking that all require specific protocols and maybe even specific hardware. But, and Tibert, I want to bring you in on this. Do I really want a future where I have to start worrying about interoperability again?
Actually, the reality is we already am making a lot of progress in redesigning the industrial networking world. I'd like to point to how a lot of corporations are doing, the traditional PLCs are almost, I'm seeing them disappear finally. And we're starting to see new hybrid devices that can actually talk some of the better protocols. I'm also seeing a lot of adoption of things like IEEE 1588 for precision time synchronization for the factory floor and so forth. So there's a lot of work already being done, and I'm very happy to see it happening. I just wish we'd start seeing little devices like that Avaya device that we covered in the
that actually
Blitz.
that did look pretty promising.
Yeah, a device like that could be used for, as long as it's fast. I totally agree with Rekha. Latency. If you don't deal with the latency, it's going to bite you in the butt, especially when you're dealing with real-time control systems or near real-time control systems, because certain things have to happen in a certain order within a certain amount of time, or you start getting weird things happening in your process control and your manufacturing.
Right. We'll come back to that in a bit because we can get real technical. But I've got an alert down in my box here from the private chat we have with the host. And basically, Curtis is throwing up his hand saying he wants to butt in here. Curtis, what's your concern?
Well, Rekha, I've got a question for you. I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago with a bunch of industrial IoT engineers, And I found, and I was surprised by this a bit, to see the same sort of cultural divide that 20 years ago we were seeing between traditional telephony people and IP telephony folks in the voice communication world, where you have what I'll stereotype as the white short sleeve shirt pocket protector folks who are very traditional when it comes to their view of this process control that they have been engineering for the last 60 years, and the new computerization and digitalization of those controls. When you talk to people around the industrial IoT, how much of this cultural divide do you have to work through? Is that something that you're finding that you're having to deal with to convince some of the existing engineers that security is a legitimate threat?
Oh, big time, actually. So my experience over the last 20 years was coming from the enterprise side. And over the last 2 years, I have been very, very deep in the industrial side. So Belden comes from, a long, long history in industrial environments. So I have access to customers that would never want to ever see an IT guy. And in my first few days doing this, I had customers that literally yelled at me and kicked me out because I vaguely mentioned my IT background. It was that, and that level of passion around IT doesn't get my problem is very real. But at the same time, that progression, like you mentioned, from telcos into this IP-based world that you go kicking and screaming into it, I think it's happening all over the industrial space. And what comes next after industrial, I'd say in the next 5 to 6 years, is that exact same push in the broadcast space. So broadcast networks still are special purpose networks, and they're behind the industrial space, but they're going kicking and screaming into IP as well. So when I think about this challenge, of course, there's the emotional, you guys don't get it. We've been in this industrial space a lot longer than IT existed. All of those philosophical discussions aside, technically, I think there's a couple of points that even both sides just don't appreciate enough. So on the security side, there's an appreciation of what is it going to take to secure an infrastructure. So that's something that the security guy can very clearly say, hey, my industrial counterpart doesn't appreciate what it's going to take to secure it. They have never secured it. These wide open networks, this is ridiculous. So that's a fair comment. And so that's not passing over to the OT side. On the OT side, the first thing you can say to piss off a guy on the OT side is to talk about data loss. Because the first thing he's going to tell you back is, I don't have any credit card data or sensitive data or whatever the excuse is. Data loss is not my problem if that's what you're trying to secure in this plant floor. Now, granted, if you're a pharma and you've got critical IP, it's a different story. But overall, the reason you're protecting these sensitive networks is resiliency. And we need that level of appreciation on both sides. And I think we've seen a handful of companies where they've really crossed that chasm. Unfortunately, it probably wasn't because of technical reasons. It happened because something really, really, really bad happened. So as much as you see the bad things in the news, what I see are real scenarios where robots moved and, really caused, damage, let's call it, human damage and human harm and really physical damage. Because of both malicious and unintended activity using IT infrastructure, IT-like infrastructure in a plant. So these bad things.
Wait, hold on, Rekha. Wait, I know you can't mention names, but
yeah,
this has actually happened. Under your watch, you've seen industrial machines taken over by an exploit or an external attack.
Right. And they're not complicated like you would think. Stuxnet is a great example of a complex, piece of technology doing some really complex bad things. These are not complex. This is someone who's been able to access a robot and change a few configurations so it moved differently and went in a different direction and killed someone. In one case, it was accidental, wow. But it was that bad. Now, the reason that's relevant on the industrial side is in the industrial world back in the 70s and 80s, safety was a suggestion, let's put it. I'm oversimplifying, but people didn't have huge safety budgets. They'd say, yeah, a guy lost a couple of fingers when we were using our machine or lathe or something like that. Today, you don't see CEOs saying, oh, safety is an option. When you are a CEO of a company that has an industrial infrastructure, you invest in safety and safety programs, and you don't argue about why is that important. But here's the funny thing. Today, cyber is not a component of those safety budgets. So back to my point about we've seen real robots and devices, valves being opened and things like that actually happen. Those are exactly should be part of a safety program, and the cybersecurity budget should come out of a safety program for those companies. And we're just not seeing a lot of that yet.
We're talking safety and security, which means I need to turn it over to Chibert.
Yeah. See, I love this conversation because I deal with smart grids, and I'm part of the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, and I always see safety and security being tossed on as an afterthought and needs to change. However, we have the federal government, Homeland Security, starting to muck around with things and try to ram some new policies down our throat that may or may not help. And I'd like to ask Rekha about Presidential Policy Directive 21, where we start talking about, let me actually quote this. The U.S. energy infrastructure fuels the economy of the 21st century. Without a stable energy supply, health and welfare is threatened, and the U.S. economy cannot function. Presidential Policy Directive 21 identifies the energy sector as uniquely critical because it provides an enabling function, blah, 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 blah. What they're really trying to do is they're demanding some integration between providers, between infrastructure within the energy segment. But doesn't that almost mean we're expanding our attack surface, which in the security world, that's really bad. So, Rekha, I think it's time for you to get up on a soapbox and tell us what you think about Presidential Directive 21.
Thanks, Chibert. I want to compare it to another phenomenon that we've seen on the IT side with the payment card industry. So I agree that, this is just like all the different compliance efforts that come at us, and they create a huge amount of paperwork and a huge amount of work and all kinds of, depending on where you sit, non-value added activity that may or may not secure your environment. I mean, I'd certainly err on the side of it's probably not securing your environment, but it's a start. So when I look at Presidential Directive 21, I see it as a couple of different things. One is it qualifies a couple of industries or three industries as being critical infrastructure, which is a good thing. We're certainly seeing a similar sort of directive now in the works coming in 2017 in Germany, where they're even broader as to what is critical infrastructure. They're asking these industries to start protecting critical infrastructure by first qualifying what parts of the infrastructure are considered critical, high, medium, low, and then within those identify what they're doing about securing it. So I think to that extent, at the policy level, what they're trying to accomplish is good. But like any good policy, it creates a mountain of policy like paperwork and activity that doesn't necessarily add value. Now, I want to just jump from that to what the energy industry is doing around NERC, which, Chibert, I'm sure you're very deeply involved in, and is all sorts of pain across so many different levels. We see customers that do both NERC efforts, and we also see some really creative NERC avoidance efforts, which are also cool from a networking perspective to watch them in action. They actually, pass the language of the law and they can avoid it. But the point here is there's this headlong push into this compliance effort to protect, arguably, to protect critical infrastructure. And it looks a lot like what happened in the early 90s around, or maybe even a little later, around the payment card industry, where there was this headlong push into cybersecurity, but more compliance with the payment card industry. So a lot of compliance activity, and retailers continue to get breached anyways. From a vendor perspective, what I saw was this initial compliance activity was compliance for the sake of compliance, followed by real cybersecurity investments, or better yet, the best customers I saw were using their compliance dollars that they probably weren't going to get funded for before. Thank goodness compliance was forcing a funding to use it towards real cybersecurity implementations. And I think I'm seeing that same sort of, I got funded because of NERC or, Presidential Directive 21 and this kind of, think tank that came in and said we should do X, Y, and Z. Whatever those reasons were, they got funding and they're trying to do some really valuable cybersecurity investments in a measured way. And if you think about it, the infrastructure they're protecting has been sitting there unprotected for 20-something years, maybe even longer in some cases. And it's about due time.
Rekha, one of the things that, as you mentioned, seems to be a tension inside of the industrial networking complex is people who don't like IT people because IT people want everything to be IP. And I want you, we're running out of time here, but I want you to leave our audience with a new perspective of how to think of connectivity for an industrial application through IP.
So I think IP is all over industrial. So I think the key thing is what's happening on top of the IP, right? So a lot of the industrial protocols are now on top of IP. And the question becomes, what do I do now that it already is? It rarely ever is a discussion. Security discussion is rarely ever at the time when they picked these technologies. But then at the same time, IP has enabled some phenomenal capabilities that people can't live without already. So I know factories that were purely, forget about IP based, they were electrical equipment, serial protocols, those kinds of things. But now you can have factory workers, look at, data from these devices that are building things, chemical plants from wherever they are, and deal with issues long before they become problems. What did it take to do that? IP-based technology, connectivity to a cloud-based capability set, mobile connectivity, and there you have it. So the process improvements that they get, the significant efficiencies that they get are the reasons they're going straight into IP to be able to do these things. And nobody wants to step back from that. So when we look at it, I don't see that situation slowing down. I think there will be more industrial Internet of Things happening. It will live side by side these 30, 40, 50-year-old equipment. So we've got an interconnectivity problem, and people will live with that because of the cost savings and the TCO and things like that, and the real, process improvements that they get out of it. So now we've got to take the security discussion seriously because it's happening.
We want to thank Rekha SHENOY for being here on This Week in Enterprise Tech. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. In fact, we're over time, but it's been a fascinating discussion of the implications of industrial network connectivity. Rekha, please, this is your time. Could you tell them where they can find more information about you, about your work, about Belden, and about securing the industrial net? Absolutely.
So please check out Belden.com. We are very active in the industrial internet conversation. We have a variety of technologies. And also, please check out Tripwire.com, which is our flagship product for enterprise security that is moving into the industrial area.
Fantastic. Rekha, again, thank you for being a guest on This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'd love to have you back at some point when we do a panel discussion on the Internet of Things, because I think you could probably offer a few professional insights as to what that world needs. So would you be willing to come back in the future?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again. Again, that is Rekha SHENOY of Belden. She is the GM of Industrial Cybersecurity, and we thank her for being part of the Twilight Riot. Well, folks, you've done it again. You've used up another hour listening to the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. That's according to 9 out of 10 SCADA devices. I want to thank my co-hosts for being here. I wouldn't do this show without them. I couldn't do the show without them. Not only are they friends, not only are they some of the brightest geeks on the shelf, But, well, I just really enjoy having them around. Let's start with you, Cheebert. Again, happy birthday tomorrow. Let's not talk about your mom giving birth for 2 years again. But where else can people find you if they were looking for the Geek in Paradise?
Well, find me on Twitter at ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab. And I want to say thank you again to JJ to the 264. Next week is one of the shows that you requested, so you better be there or be square, dude.
There you go. And also, you're going to be at Cisco Live in the near future. Well, are you going to give people a chance to shake your hand, buy you a drink?
Actually, I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to be speaking in the Path Solutions booth, and if you come up with good questions, I'm going to throw you a bag of Kona coffee.
You and your Kona coffee. That is your drug of choice, my friend.
Hey, man, I'm going to caffeinate the world.
That sounds really scary, actually. All right, let's also thank my other good friend, Curtis Franklin, who I'm assuming you're going to be bouncing around the world again, because that's kind of what you do, right, Curtis?
It is what I do, and I wish I could tell you every place I'm going to be, but the schedule is a little bit up in the air. But it's made better by the fact that I, too, am frequently caffeinated with Kona coffee, and I can owe a great debt of gratitude to Brian for my continued employment for many years. I tell you what we're doing, though. We're already starting. We had the first meetings this last week on what we're doing for Interop 2017. A lot of new things coming up, and many of those are going to be foreshadowed on things we're doing at Information Week. One of the areas I'm going to be very involved in is in the whole DevOps world, DevOps and Agile. We're going to be doing a lot about that, both in terms of podcasts, in webcasts, and in articles at Information Week. So I've got a lot of that coming up. Hope that people will join me at Information Week for all of those. And especially if I can actually survive the race that I'm running on the morning of July 4th. I don't know what possessed me to decide to run a race in Florida on the 4th of July. But like I said, assuming we don't all burst into flames, I'll be writing my little hands off at informationweek.com.
Could you wear some sort of tracking device so we could put your location on real time on some map? That would be a cool use of IoT. I'm just thinking.
We can make it happen.
Let's make it happen. Curtis Franklin, Brian Chi, thank you very much. Of course, you are the heart and soul of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and people, I salute you. I also want to salute you, the person who drops by each and every single week. We could not do this show without your support. Over the years, it's been tremendous, and I want to thank you. I want to make it easier for you to get your enterprise fix. Just go to our show page at twit.tv/Twiet. That's TWIET. There you will find all of our back episodes, along with links of the stories that we've covered in our bits and our bytes, where to find our guests. It's sort of a way for you to look back and reference the work that we've done on This Week in Enterprise Tech. Don't forget that we do this show live every Friday, 1:30 p.m. Pacific time, live.twit.tv. If you tune in live, you can watch the pre-show, the post-show, everything in between. You can see the bloopers, all the things that get taken out, and you can participate in the experiment that is Twit TV. A part of that participation is our live chat room. You may notice that Cheebert, Curtis, and myself pull questions out of the chat room. That's because you are actually right there. If you go to irc.twit.tv, I can see you, I can answer your questions, I can ask our guests the questions you have in real time. Talk about real-time applications. This is one of the ones that you really should do. Again, that's irc.twit.tv. Don't forget that you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. If you follow me there, not only will you know what we're going to be doing each week on This Week in Enterprise Tech, not only will you be able to ask me about guests and topics you want on future shows, but you'll get to see what I do when I'm not at the Twit TV studios. Again, that's twitter.com/PadreSJ. Finally, I want to thank everyone here in the studio who makes this show possible, to Lisa and Leo for letting us do this show for so long. Of course, to Cheebert, my super producer, and to my technical director. That's right, he's Kevin the Shark. Kevin, do you have a camera on yourself? There we go. Yes, he is celebrating Shark Week. And Kevin, what is it that you do here at Twit?
I sleep on the couch and eat snacks and occasionally edit.
Okay. Well, of course, at the end of every episode, we need to ask Kevin a very important networking question. And in this particular case, Kevin, what is the answer to life, the universe, and everything?
Tiger sharks.
Oh, I'm sorry. The answer was 42. Well, we'll play another episode of Stump Kevin next week. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Father Robert Balacer, the digital Jesuit, just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep quiet.